Champlain audiocast test. Test, test, test. Oh.
Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. So welcome to this meeting of the Built Heritage Subcommittee, which is starting a little bit earlier than normal. Apologies for the change in schedule. We have two regrets this morning, members Smallwood and Quinn, who could not join us. So we'll start with declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest among members? I see none. Confirmation of minutes. So the minutes from our meeting on the 12th of February 2015. Carried? Great. Okay, we have two communication matters to mention. So Heritage Matters Volume 13, Issue 1 of February 2015 was distributed, as was Heritage Stewards Donor News 2015. So I just would mention those. So we have three substantive items to go through this morning. We're going to start, we have speakers for the second and third, and no speakers registered for the first. So we'll start with item 1, which is the designation of the City of Ottawa Workshop, 7 Bayview Road, under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. For those members of the committee who were here last time, you will know that there was a request, a motion from the Built Heritage Subcommittee to ask staff to bring forward a recommendation with regard to 7 Bayview Road in the first quarter of 2015, which we've managed to do just under the wire. So we've received comments both from Heritage Ottawa and from the Hindenburg Community Association in favor of the recommendation of staff to support designation. So a question, yes, please.
I know this is where the Innovation Center is going to go, so this is not going to cause I mean, there's been preliminary designs, I know, done for that, but that's not included in this designation at the moment. So do you see any difficulties there? We wouldn't want to hinder that project.
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, I don't see any problems with that. We've been working very closely with the staff working on the Innovation Center on those preliminary designs, so they are all, the designs take the potential designation into account.
Okay, good, thank you.
And Ms. Collins, the RFP closes shortly, correct?
I believe it's the first week in April.
Right. And is there anything in the RFP, in the way it was worded or stated, which you think would pose any problems with designation, any potential contradictions between the RFP and designation?
No, as I said, we worked very closely in the drafting of the RFP with the staff working on the Innovation Center to ensure that the heritage interest was included in the RFP. The draft statement of reason for designation was included in the RFP, and we've been involved in the process all along, so I'm not concerned about any contradictions there.
Sorry, other questions from members?
Yeah. Just see, when we get somebody doing an addition on a building that's heritage, we usually get a report on that addition here. Is that going to come for this building as well?
So the first phase of this project does not include an addition. The second phase does include a 12-story tower. That's not what's out for the RFP right now. So when the time comes that the second phase is being worked on, that will come forward to the Built Heritage
Subcommittee. So you're not changing the windows and all that kind of thing in this one?
I think we have to wait and see what the final proposal is in terms of the changes that are being made to the building.
I always think that the city has to meet the same rules everybody else does, even more. Right.
Okay, question from the Vice Chair.
Just a comment. I think that this is a compliment to the city staff, both the planning staff and economic development, that the report recommending designation is actually coming through this committee as recommended by the committee last year, and that it is being tabled prior to the design-build RFP submissions. And I think that this is showing exemplary behavior to the community out there and developers out there, that designating a building doesn't necessarily mean that it inhibits the economic use or the future of the heritage resource. So I think that this is a designation to remember, And I think that the next stage where the city will be reviewing the design-build proposals from developer contractors, that the heritage values of the building will be taken into account. So I think this is a success story.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Seeing none, the recommendation before us is that the BHC recommend that Planning Committee recommend that Council issue a notice of intention to designate the City of Ottawa workshops, 7 Bayview Road, under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, according to the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value attached as Document 5. Carried? Carried. Great. Thank you. Okay, the second item on our agenda is an application for new construction at 239 to 241 Bank Street, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Centretown Heritage Conservation District. So we have a staff presentation, and then we have 2 speakers registered. So, Ms. Collins, I'll turn it over to you for the presentation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The application before the committee today is for new construction on a property at the corner of Bank and Lisker Streets. It's at the southeast corner. If the lights go down a little bit, you might be able to see better. It's at the southeast corner. It's located within the Centretown Heritage Conservation District, as you can see here. The property is located here at the corner, and then I've just highlighted and brought it in. It is located within sort of a core of historic buildings within Bank Street, in this sort of little arm at the north of the Centretown Heritage Conservation District. The building itself, which is no longer there, was a Category 4 building within the Heritage District. It's this little former pizza place at the corner. Due to a mapping error, the building was demolished in December with a legally issued building permit, but without heritage approval under the Heritage Act. We have worked to correct that problem in the GIS system, and luckily this was a Category 4 building that we would not have objected to its demolition in any case. This is looking across Lisker Street at the site after the demolition of the building, so you can see the fencing here. So the building was located here. This is, as I said, it's located on Bank Street, and there are several historic buildings surrounding it. So this is looking to the southwest at 242, 246 Bank Street and 250 Bank Street, which are a Category 2 and 3 building respectively. And this is the neighboring property to the south, so you can see the construction fencing here, and then this is a Category 2 building at 243, 249 Bank Street. Looking northwest from the site, so this is Kitty Corner, 232, and then 216 to 224 Bank Street, which are both Category 2 buildings. So as you can see, the block surrounding this property has a very high level of integrity and reflects the late 19th and early 20th century character of historic Bank Street, with a typical sort of between 2 and 4 story scale with ground floor retail and then mixed use above, with recessed entrances, the use of red brick, symmetrical facades, and a very even rhythm to the street. This is directly north of the building. Again, this one has been painted white, but it does reflect the typical character of Bank Street in this particular location. So the application before the committee today is to construct the new building on the site because applications for new construction in heritage districts require City Council approval under Section 41 of the Act. So the application is to construct a 6-story mixed-use building at the corner. It also requires site plan control and minor variances to the zoning bylaw. This is the proposed site plan. The property is irregularly shaped. You can see it's sort of an L shape at the corner, and then this is the adjacent property. This is the Bank Street elevation of the property. As I said, it's a 6-story mixed-use building, so it's got ground floor retail, 3 stories up, and then the top 2 stories are a step back. And this is to help sort of reflect the typical character of Bank Street, which is generally a maximum of 4 stories. The zoning here does permit 6 stories. The ground floor features large windows and separated by piers, the use of dichromatic brick on the upper stories, as well as some decorative motifs in stone and metal, large metal windows, and a corner tower element. This is the Lisker Street elevation. The building is sort of got a U shape on the Lisker Street elevation, so it's got kind of an interior courtyard with balconies facing into it. And the loading, the garage access will be here off of Lisker Street. This is the east elevation, so again, it's quite close to the property line, so there isn't really a whole lot to say in terms of design here. And the south elevation, which is partially obscured by another building. So the recommendation before the committee today is to approve the application for new construction subject to the following conditions. Approval of the other related heritage planning applications, being the site plan control application and the minor variances from the Committee of Adjustment, and simplification of the design details to conform to the Centretown Heritage Conservation District guidelines and the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada. And I'm now going to go through the guidelines and the standards and guidelines just to highlight the areas of that staff were concerned with in terms of the design of this building. Overall, we believe that the building is appropriate from a massing, scale, and form perspective for this corner, and we think that with some further refinement to the design, the building could make a very positive contribution to the Centretown Heritage Conservation District. So the guidelines for new buildings in the Centretown Heritage Conservation District, there is a full section on new mixed-use buildings in the commercial corridors, being Bank and Elgin Streets. So here it says new buildings should be 2 to 4 stories in height with ground floor retail, commercial, or residential uses above. So as I mentioned earlier, this building is 6 stories. However, the upper 2 stories have been set back from the front facade to help mitigate that additional height, and we are not particularly concerned with that. Ground floor should feature large window, recessed entrances, and transom windows. The ground floor of this building is proposed to have large windows, transoms, all of that sort of thing, but the recessed entrances have not been included, and this is a very important character-defining element of the Bank Street corridor, and the ground floor would better reflect the rhythm and the character of Bank Street if the entrances were recessed. It also mentions the use of cornices and horizontal sign bands to separate the ground floor from the upper floors, which this building does propose. Additionally, upper floor facades should be more opaque with smaller openings and a simple rhythm, the use of a cornice or parapet at the roofline, and consideration should be given to the use of a turret or other device to acknowledge the corner presence. As I mentioned, the form, scale, massing, and choice of materials are sympathetic to the character of the district. However, the detailing is far more complex than elsewhere in the HCD, and it should be simplified to reflect the commercial character and ensure that the new building does not dominate the streetscape. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I speak to the standards and guidelines. Design modifications will be required to address the issue of detailing. And then I think the final guideline for the Centretown Heritage District is that materials, colors, and detailing should ensure continuity in the streetscape. So here, as I said, you've got red and buff brick, limestone, wood, metal windows. And this material palette is compatible with materials throughout the district. However, most buildings don't feature all of these materials at once. The use of high-quality materials is integral to the success of this design. So if the committee approves the proposal, tying the applicant to the use of natural materials and the samples that have been provided is very important, and that will be further detailed through the site plan process. The standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada were approved by City Council in 2008 and are used to assess all applications under the Ontario Heritage Act. The applicable standards here are Standard 1 and Standard 11, so conserve the heritage value of a historic place, and conserve the heritage value when creating any new additions to a historic place. So it notes that the form, scale, and massing are appropriate. New buildings should be subordinate to and distinguishable from historic buildings in the HCD. And this is one of the areas where we have some concern. The building has some historicist detailing, but we feel that with its current architectural style, it will not be subordinate to the historic buildings in the HCD, and it will overwhelm them. And I think we're saying the additional height and size is appropriate, but the detailing needs to be brought back a little bit in order to allow the building to blend better with the streetscape. The historicist details that have been employed in the building evoke the character of other cities and are not sympathetic to the simple character of Bank Street in the HCD. There was a cultural heritage impact statement provided for this project, as staff determined that the project had the potential to adversely impact the character of the Bank Street, the Centertown Heritage Conservation District. The cultural heritage impact statement was prepared by Julie Harris of Content Works, who is a member of the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals. Its conclusion states that the proposed development will have a positive impact on the value of the Centertown HCD and has potential to serve as a model for future projects that choose to work more directly with historic architectural motifs. Staff agree that the overall development will have a positive impact, but feel that there are some minor changes to the design required in order to have it be an example for the future. In terms of consultation, Councillor McKinney supports this application. Heritage Ottawa was notified of the application and supports the proposal. I believe you have comments from them as well. Neighbors within 30 meters of the property were notified of the application and offered the opportunity to comment. I don't believe any comments were submitted. And the Centertown Community Association was also notified of the application, and they did not submit any comments. This application has also been to the Urban Design Review Panel as part of the site plan process, and I have the comments available here if anybody would like to see them, but essentially the Urban Design Review Panel shared many of the same concerns that staff have raised in the report under the Heritage Act. So the proposed conditions that I've been talking about, again, approval subject to other related planning applications, and then design refinements as followed, and these are more detailed in document 7 of the report. The ground floor entrances are to be recessed. The design of decorative elements is to be simplified to more accurately reflect the character of the district. The tower element of the 6th story is to be minimized, and more prominence is to be given to the tower at the 4th story in order to help, again, mitigate that height and emphasize the 4-story character of the district. The sense of verticality that is created through the brick piers and large vertical windows is to be mitigated through the strengthening of the horizontal lines of the building, including ensuring continuity with the neighboring building to the south. And the guideline states that the upper floor facade should be more opaque with smaller openings and a simple rhythm, and the fenestration pattern of the building is to be consistent with this guideline. So to conclude, we are recommending approval of the application subject to the conditions I've just outlined and detailed in document 7. We are recommending delegation of authority for these design changes and any other minor design changes that arise through the process to the General Manager of Planning and Growth Management, and issuing the heritage permit with a 2-year expiry date from the date of issuance. I'm sorry for the lengthy presentation, but it was a bit of a complicated one.
No, thank you very much. That was very useful. We do, as I mentioned on our speakers list, we have two speakers, including the proponent's architect, but I want to give members an opportunity to ask questions of staff now. Please hold off with comments until afterwards. But any questions of Ms. Collins before we hear from our guest speakers? Okay, so in that case, perhaps I can call Mr. Dreesen up, please. You are our first speaker on the list.
Is it on here already?
There's something on
Okay. I'll find it for you. I can move over as well. Do you want to sit here? Yeah, we can move over.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Welcome to the committee. Perhaps you can introduce your colleagues as well.
My name is Stephanie Morris, Folsman Consultants, and I'm the agent for...
Sorry, we need the microphone. Just press the button. Perfect.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Stephanie Morris of Folsman Consultants, and I'm the agent for the applicant.
Okay, I just want to be clear. So you're also registered to speak.
Yes.
So just to let you know, you'll have 5 minutes, and then Mr. Dreesen will have 5 minutes. So a total of 10 minutes if you're doing it jointly.
Sure.
Okay.
I might just begin, if
Okay.
that's okay. I just want to begin with how excited we are with the project and how pleased we are that we have the support of the Community Association, the Business Association, Heritage Ottawa, and recognition by Julie Harris in her Cultural Heritage Impact Statement. Just to give you an overview of the process, we submitted the site plan application back in June of 2014. Comments from circulation have since been received and responded through a formal resubmission. The building design has also gone through the Urban Design Review Panel, and the comments of the panel have been incorporated into the design where possible. Some minor variances were also identified, and the application is being reviewed by the Committee of Adjustment to be heard on April 15th. The application in building design has therefore gone through substantial review through numerous ongoing processes through the Planning Department, Urban Design Review Panel, Heritage, and Committee of Adjustment. Our team has been doing our best to address all of the comments, which can occasionally contradict each other, while maintaining the integrity of the design and the project as a whole. With that in mind, we are pleased that the recommendation to the committee is for approval, and I will now allow Tone to go through the recommended conditions and where we have some concerns.
Good morning. Thank you for being here, for giving us an opportunity. So we are grateful that the committee overall supports the overall application, but do have some concerns about the conditions. As noted, we did go through the Urban Design Review Panel. One of the verbal comments that never made it into print we found rather surprising, and that was that Ottawa doesn't have a history of nicely detailed brick buildings. That notwithstanding, we did go through after the Urban Design Review Panel comments and did take to heart some of those comments and did work with staff to make modifications to the design, to simplify the design. The cornices have been simplified, various details and elements have been simplified throughout. So we have already been through that revision process, and we are attempting to maintain the integrity of the architectural design. Some of the specifics, and I'll try to skip ahead if I get this to some of the specifics. So one of the conditions, the first condition is that there is the front of the building at the entrances be recessed. So the front of the building, the entrances are already recessed. So this is the adjacent, let me go back here. So this is the adjacent building that is sort of has the most architectural cues that we can look at with the adjacent structures. So this is the adjacent structure. There we go. And you can see that the existing front entrance is recessed about 1 meter from the entrance. These are, later additions and modifications to the ground floor. Our building entrance is already recessed 1 meter. Oh, this didn't quite work out. So our building front entrance is already recessed at the entranceway 1 full meter from the property line. So we've already addressed the fact that the entranceways are recessed. We don't really see the particular value in that if we recessed these front entrances an extra 1/2 meter, 1 meter. We're not sure that that would have a positive impact other than reducing available floor space. We're still maintaining that entranceway close to the front street and providing that. The second second condition is that the details of mail railings and so forth, as I said, have already been simplified. So when I go here to the building elevations, there we go. We have a very simple rhythm of pilasters with a generous window-to-wall ratio. We have a simplified pilaster detail with a very modest cornice at the top, some very gentle brick detailing in dentils, with a very subtle arch at the corner, which is expressed in an express tower at the fourth floor, which has a more detailed corner expression at the fourth floor, with then a modification that the tower at the sixth level, where it's recessed, still maintains some of that rhythm. Truncating this tower at the corner to eliminate this projection up here, we feel would do a disservice to the rhythm of the corner expression. Some of the other comments that, we should have expressed horizontality. Well, we already have the breakup that is suggested that the ground floor commercial be separated from the residential floors, as well as a cornice at the fourth floor. Adding additional cornices or horizontal detailing in between levels at this third floor or second floor as well, we think would have a negative impact, because this is, we think, is a quite simple rhythm of bays and pilasters. The larger windows that are larger in proportion perhaps to the contemporary structures next door we believe, we've already met the requirements of having punched windows in a opaque wall with stone detailing and panels. Reducing the size of the windows becomes a qualitative discussion, and we would question whether or not how we could best resolve that, if we reduce the windows by 10% or 5% or 11%, or what number we would agree to, and that becomes then a value-based qualitative discussion. That is, we would like to see some consistency, and so we believe that we've already made modifications to this design and are meeting the intent of providing punched windows, i.e. not contemporary curtain wall. In terms of design simplification that does not outshine the adjacent existing character, one of our concerns is that the existing adjacent character, while historic, does have some detailing, but it is quite modest. There is brick detailing at the top, but it is quite opaque, quite flat. There are large windows. There is very simple detailing of some of the cornices. And as we look at some of this detailing, it is quite modest, which is consistent with sort of the turn of the century, fairly modest construction detailing. And for our new building to be less than this would set a lower design excellence standard than I think is the goal of the city. That if these existing structures become the bar of what is accepted, we would not want to be less than existing. We're not saying that this is terrible. We're just saying that this is very modest and of its time. And as the committee notes, these new buildings are to be of their own time. So we are working with contemporary detailing, a client who is enthusiastic about this project and wants the best. So not precast panels, not stucco, but using actual carved limestone, actual stone detailing, and authentic brick scales and sizes, we believe have met the intent of the requirements. So while we're satisfied with the report and the recommendations, we do have concerns about the conditions and would like to have the application approved without the 4 conditions listed.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Let me offer an opportunity for members of the committee to ask any questions of our guest speakers. Councillor McKinney? It's more for questions at this stage. I'll pose a question of my own then. In terms of the conditions that staff have outlined that we approve in document 7, are there any that you feel, you outlined some of the conditions with which you had difficulty. Are there any which you think could be worked out in terms of future iterations or modifications of the plans?
Speaking on behalf of my client, we could recess the front doors further. There are, as I said, there are already entrances on Bank Street are already recessed a meter. If there was a decision to recess them 1.5 meters, and we could all agree that 1.5 meters was acceptable, we could agree on 1.5 meters. But is 1.5 meters appreciably better than 1 meter? Is it 2 meters? Is it 3 meters? Is it 5 meters? We don't know what the specifics are. So we would like there to be something firm that we could agree in a public forum that has had the opportunity for everybody to vet that a number that is reasonable. And as I said, we've already recessed this a meter. So is it 1.5 meters? Is that what a reasonable number is? We just like that to be clear so that everybody understands what the decision is.
Okay, thank you. A question from Councillor McKenney, please.
Thank you. I just want to say that I do support this application. I think it's a great building. I think it will do a lot for that corner of Bank and Lisgar, and I'm excited to see it happen, actually. Just picking up on what Chair Nussbaum asked in terms of the conditions, I personally don't have an issue with the recessed entrance. I think that 1 meter versus 1.5 meter is fine. Nor do I have an issue with the reduction in the windows. The only thing I'll ask is the sense of verticality. Can you explain what? That's the second bullet under condition B, continued. Can you just explain how you feel your, because that's the only one that stands out a bit for me. Can you explain how your application stands today would meet this requirement? How is this? When you compared your building, because I agree with you, when you compared your building to the buildings around it in terms of the some of the design elements, I thought that it did fit quite closely. But I just wonder that second bullet, what in terms of strengthening the horizontal lines of the building, is that something that you could live with?
Well, I think that the challenge becomes if we were to introduce a horizontal element, for example, at matching the parapet of the adjacent structure across this line, we would be breaking the front facade, which currently has, in my personal humble opinion, as an architect, some quite nice proportions. There is a nice proportion to this bay that is already separated by a horizontal element at the commercial section as well as at the roof level. There is a programmatic relationship that this line is commercial, this is residential. So adding a parapet or a cornice line along this line or along both lines programmatically doesn't do anything. It just becomes something that's kind of glued on. It doesn't differentiate between materials. It doesn't have a positive impact. There is already, I mean, you could argue that there is a horizontal element between each bay with these carved limestone panels, detailed sills, detailed cornices, impacted sills. There is already a horizontal element. We're not talking about a continuous ribbon of vertical curtain wall. So, I mean, we could glue on a cornice across this point if that was beneficial, but it doesn't add anything. There is a relationship that there is, you know, a nice series of punch windows. This pair of bays reflects sort of the golden section. This pair of bays reflects again that sort of golden section, that ideal 1 to 1.6 kind of ratio. There is an intent and a purpose behind the design integrity with this that we're trying to maintain. And we don't think that adding a horizontal element, be it cornice or breakup of these pilasters, does anything of benefit.
Okay, so, but it could be done without reducing the window size.
It could be done.
I understand what you're saying, that it has no function. And
it has no function.
And a look, but okay.
And if we added horizontal elements, it would not only eliminate the possibility of these of carved limestone, like we're retaining that skill of carved masonry and limestone that is reflective of a high quality building. We would eliminate the ability to do that, or create something small, and then the vertical pilasters would interrupt that. Unless we eliminate the vertical pilasters, which sort of defeats the purpose and is inconsistent where we have vertical pilasters on adjacent structures.
Okay, thank you. My next question will be to staff when we get there. Okay, thanks.
Okay, other questions from committee members of our guest speakers? Seeing none, I'd like to thank you very much for appearing before us. And
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
okay, I'd like to return to staff for a moment because following the presentation from the visitors, I have a question of staff and perhaps others do as well. So, Ms. Collins, having heard now both from you and from our visitors, my question is to what extent of all of the conditions which you are proposing the committee consider, and having heard the proponent's architect, can you maybe identify the one or two issues that you think are most critical for you in terms of your interpretation of ensuring that the standards and guidelines of the HCD are preserved?
Sure, no problem. The way the conditions were written was by going through both the standards and guidelines, but also the guidelines for the Centertown Heritage Conservation District, which are approved by council. And those are the guidelines that we used in assessing the application. So there's no weighting given to those guidelines within the Centertown Heritage Conservation District study. That being said, I think, the two key points, in my opinion, and this was one of them was reflected at least through the Urban Design Review Panel as well, was just the level of detail. So the Urban Design Review Panel, just read to you, says, the building succeeds in picking up the historical proportion of walls and windows, but has tried to incorporate too many small conflicting heritage details. So here we're seeing, and we would agree with that, so here we're seeing these carved limestone panels with a fan motif. You can't really see them in this image because it's a bit small. A metal railing with a sort of fan motif. These sort of elements, all the different materials, the different windows, the parapets, the cornices. There's just too much going on, and we think we're not suggesting that it needs to be more modest than the modest vernacular commercial buildings of Bank Street, but it needs to be at least, sort of as modest, I guess, or it needs to be more of a background building, I guess, is where we're going. So that would be one. And then the second one would be the recessed entrances at the ground floor. It's not so much pulling the door back. I'm just going to see if I have a photo of an adjacent building that shows its entrances. This is the photo that the applicant showed as well. It's not a great photo, actually, but it's not so much just pulling the door in, it's the idea of the traditional storefront pattern, which is a window with a bulkhead underneath and an angled wall that recesses into an entrance, and then an angled wall back out and another window. So it's window, door, window, as opposed to big window and then door. So that is a very prominent characteristic of the Bank Street Heritage District, and it's something that we think is very important. So those would be the two things that I think are the most important. I think the idea of the verticality could be partially mitigated through the refinement of the design details, or the simplification of the design details. Because one of the things, I'll just go to the elevation, we weren't suggesting, adding another something else going across the middle, because there's a lot going on already. But perhaps if these panels are removed or simplified or something, it just doesn't feel like it lines up completely right now. And I think a strengthening of this horizontal line, whether it's through ensuring that all the elements are at the same level, or whether it's through changing it and introducing a string course or something similar, that could help mitigate that vertical impact. But I would say the design simplification and the ground floor entrances would be the two biggest concerns for staff. But as I said, the guidelines don't weight, the guidelines are not weighted in terms of importance.
Thank you. So I just want to be able to understand, because so when you say the design simplifications, I'm just not sure if I understand what that means. Are you talking about removing the things like the motifs and the fancy kind of brickwork, or are you talking about satisfying it with the strengthening of the horizontal lines? I'm just not, because it just seems to be a bit nebulous to me anyway. I'm just not. I'm not entirely certain. I think that I agree with you whenever I look at, you know, a new building that fits within our Conservation Heritage District. While I want it to look modern, while I understand that there will be some, you know, it will look different than something that was built, you know, many years ago. I still like that. Obviously, it's why we have heritage districts. We want our buildings to blend and to keep that character of the neighborhood. But I'm just not sure which one is going to satisfy that. If you could just explain that, that'd be great.
Through you, Mr. Chair, essentially, the reason we didn't prescribe exactly what we wanted the applicant to do is because we didn't want to dictate the design in specifics. We wanted to allow the opportunity to come to an agreement with the applicant if council were to approve the conditions that we've outlined. So that's the reason that we hadn't sort of laid out exactly what we thought it might be, because we didn't want to completely design the building for them. So my thought is that the removal or simplification of some of these design elements, like the carved stone panels or the railings, could assist then in establishing that horizontality and mitigating some of the other concerns that we have. We are not opposed to the idea that this is a historicist building. We just think that if a building is going to evoke a historic style in Ottawa, it should evoke a historic style of Ottawa. And at this point, we don't feel that this building does that.
But would you be satisfied that it does, I guess, if we had, you know, the ground floor entrances, if they were to be recessed, but also the horizontal lines of the building strengthened? Would you, because my understanding is that was something that the Urban Review Design Panel as well was concerned about. So if those two characteristics were included in the building, do you think that would, in your opinion, would that satisfy the historicist element of the building?
I think that would be moving in the right direction, for sure. We do feel that the architectural details are too exuberant, let's say.
Okay, other questions? Vice Chair Podolsky.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions. I guess one of the ones that I think needs to be I guess more fully explored here, it has to do with the fact that it appears that the staff support and the building conforms to the form and massing that are appropriate for the district. Now, in terms of the Committee of Adjustment application, is the application related to extra stories? Is there more height being asked for? Maybe you could help us to look at the way in which the staff report suggests, you know, a series of conditions, and I think we should really understand whether this relates at all to the application for a Committee of Adjustment on height.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the Committee of Adjustment application would not, its approval would not impact the conditions that we've proposed. And in fact, we've proposed that if the Committee of Adjustment goes forward with an approval prior to this getting to Council, that they tie it sort of generally to plans in the instance that the plans change. So I believe, and I'm just going on memory, the minor variance is for a small variance to the height, but it's not extra stories or anything like that. It's quite a small thing.
Just to follow up, Leslie, I think that the reason I'm asking that is that the standards and guidelines for historic places in Canada talk about new buildings should be subordinate to and distinguishable from the historic buildings in the Heritage Conservation District. So that a 6-story building I think we would all agree is not subordinate to a three-story building next to it, so that the citing that the building, is not subordinate is a little difficult to understand. I'm an architect, and I should be able to understand these things. And so if it is more about the style and detailing of the facades rather than the height and massing and scale of the building, the comment that you're making to this committee about justifying the conditions added, you speak about it, the style and detailing do not reflect the historic character of the Bank Street commercial corridor, and its historicist details evoke the character of other cities. Now, this is a very curious comment, because what you see on Bank Street is not unfamiliar what you see in Main Street America and Main Street Canada. I think that's one of the things that we notice about, our traditional main streets in North America, and that there's a lot of shared detailing. And I would just like to understand what is alien about this building that it does not fit to Ottawa but fits somehow in other cities. I think that part of this committee, part of this public hearing is educational, and I think that particular comment about evoking a character of other cities should maybe be explained a bit so that we understand that.
As has been said numerous times this morning, the historic character of Bank Street is that of a late 19th and early 20th century commercial street with fairly vernacular, modest buildings. We don't have on Bank Street the very sort of high-style commercial buildings that are found in other cities. So that's where that comment comes from, is that this building has the proposed building has a very historicist character, but it's not reflecting the history of Ottawa or Ottawa's buildings, and it doesn't necessarily fit in terms of its detailing. So that's the comment of where it comes from. We never had, there are very few buildings that I can think of, perhaps Somerset House is one I can think of, that had some, elaborate detailing that would be closer to reflecting this, but there aren't very many sort of high-style commercial buildings in the downtown core that I can think of.
Again, as the architect on the committee, I'm trying to understand how stripping down the detailing will make this a background building. I think that what you said, one of the objectives was to make it a background building. A 6-story building next to a 3-story building, a 2-story, but it can't be a background building. So there are difficulties with the comments because there's no really clear direction other than simplifying, which is quite nebulous. And so I'm asking these questions to help us all understand what the architects and what the owner really should be doing to, to fit the standards and guidelines. What we have, of course, is we have support from Heritage Ottawa that has studied at the Centertown Community Association, and the Heritage consultant who said it fits. Is that not true? Have I got that wrong? Sorry, Sally, you were shaking your head.
Centertown didn't comment back to us. They might have commented back to the architect,
Okay.
but we didn't hear from them. Plus, Heritage Ottawa supports the staff recommendation. So there's a difference between the staff recommendation and if you look at the correspondence that you received, that's what it says. That was received today. Or yesterday, I think Rosemary circulated that to you.
I stand corrected, thank you. But in any case, could you explain what appears to be the objective of making this design, a 6-story building, be a background building?
I don't think anybody could argue that a 6-story building here was a background building, and and that's not what, if that's the way it came across, that wasn't my intention. I think the key here is to mitigate the impact of a 6-story building and make it less of a foreground building. So it may not be a background building, but it's not overwhelming the street and drawing attention to itself and away from the historic character of Bank Street. So that's our intention. And as I mentioned earlier, we did not want to prescribe specific design details to the architect because we felt that that most of these changes were relatively minor and that we could come to an agreement with the architect if council were to approve it as written, and that we can consult after the fact and not sort of tie everybody down to an exact detail.
Other questions for staff? Okay, now's the opportunity for general comments, and maybe I'll start just by saying I think where I'm struggling and where I'm hearing maybe some struggling from other members is if you look at the character-defining elements section in the Statement of Significance of the HCD, there are a series of different elements there, and it is true that some are matters of interpretation. For example, one of the principles is the HCD is characterized by its varied building types and styles due to the diverse populations of the area. Another is the predominant use of Rito red clay, decorative brick veneer with trim details in stone, wood, and pressed metal. So in some instances, I think we have a situation where the applicant is very much respecting this more heterogeneous spirit of the HCD, yet I think staff are also interpreting perhaps the more detailed or the more strict elements of the HCD in order to try and get to a building which is in conformity in all of its forms. So that's how I'm interpreting the struggle a little bit. I must admit that, and there's nothing staff can actually do about this, but the fact that the HCD seems to prohibit an attempt to improve or embellish the architecture in a way that does represent a new form and reflects the varied style, I think is a little bit unfortunate because it suggests we can never have a landmark building, however you define that, in the HCD. But that isn't staff's fault. That's an issue for the HCD document. So that's what I'm reflecting in terms of comments I've heard so far, but I'm open to other observations and comments. Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Chair. I do want to reiterate that, I do think that this is a good building. I think that it will, greatly enhance that corner of Bank Street, Bank and Lisgar, that full corner. It does, from people I've spoken to in the community, they, certainly do feel that it reflects the character of Bank Street, fits with our, traditional Main Street conditions. I guess, where I'm looking at now, I am struggling, as some of my colleagues are here. I'd like to move, if I can, that we remove document 7, the conditions in the document. I would be comfortable with approving the application for the new construction, removing those conditions out of document 7, and the 1B, simplification of the design details, and delegate authority for the minor design changes to the general manager for planning and growth management. Hoping that, asking that the proponents obviously enter into this in good faith. I think that they have, and up until now, as I watched this move through the different iterations, I felt that they certainly did come to the table and made some good changes to the design. So, in terms of the specific design details, I'm going to move that we, again, remove document 7, delegate the authority for minor design change to the general manager, and that's...
Okay, thank you very much. From what I understand, Councillor McKinney, you are proposing that we amend paragraph 1 of the recommendation in such a way as that we would remove the words detailed in document 7, and then we would remove subparagraph B, but the other elements of the motion would be retained. Is that a correct interpretation of your intentions?
Yes, it is, and I'd just like to change number 3, that delegate authority for minor detail changes, not including those, but I guess including those outlined in document 7 to the general manager. I don't want to remove that part, but I don't want to make it a specific condition to our approval. Does that make sense? So I would, it would read the same way, but am I correct then that it wouldn't, the general manager would enter into discussions around the design changes with document 7 in mind, looking at those changes, but not necessarily, that's not what would, it wouldn't be prescriptive to approval.
Okay, I'm going to ask our friends from legal to opine. I think what that would require maybe is a slight change to paragraph 3, delegate authority for minor design changes, something like including the elements presented in document 7, comma, taking into consideration the elements outlined in document 7, comma, to the general manager, but that would be more of guidance. It wouldn't be a condition of the approval. So I think the message to the proponent would be that we would like the proponent to consider some of the key elements like the entranceways, which staff have recommended. So I'm going to ask our colleagues from the legal department if you can help us out.
Mr. Chair, with respect to the proposed motion, so that I can clarify, document 7 also refers to the additional planning approvals that need to be provided, and so I think in order to affect the change that the committee is looking at, we would have a motion whereas the report recommends approval of the application with conditions as detailed in document 7 of the report, and whereas further submissions have been made, therefore, we can amend document 7, condition B specifically, so that rather than saying it addresses the following design issues, that they consult with staff, to consider the following issues. Is that the clarification that you're looking for, Mr. Chair?
That sounds like it would meet Councillor McKinney's objectives. So, sorry, can you just read that out one more time, just so that everybody understands the way the motion
I will also draft it so that we can have it for the record, Mr. Chair. But the recommendation would be to approve the application subject to the following conditions as detailed in document 7, so that still includes A and B on the first page, and the delegation of authority for minor design changes, including those outlined in document 7. We would change that to consider those outlined in document 7, and then document 7 condition B would be amended to delete the word, to delete the phrase, the following design issues are to be addressed in consultation, and replaced with the following design issues are to be considered in consultation with heritage staff.
Okay. Is that something that you think you'd be able to put up on the screen for us, or is that not realistic? Okay. Okay, great. Maybe at this stage I can ask committee members, since you have a sense of Councillor McKenney's motion, for comments on that. Councillor Wilkinson?
I think that would open it up a little bit to a little more flexibility. I think that's your purpose there, Councillor?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. I think that, the proponent has, worked with staff, worked through this process in good faith. My community likes this building. I like the building. It's, again, it fits within the Centertown Heritage District. And, it's good for our traditional Main Street, so.
It's a good-looking building.
I just like, I'm just offering.
I think
offering some
recessing the entrance a
flexibility.
little more. I always like to go into an entrance where I'm protected from the weather when I'm going into the building. That's what they're there for. Anyway, that could be handled onto that, I'm sure. But it is, and I think the point that you made, that we're almost sanitizing the buildings by having them all follow all these rules, so we don't get a spectacular building. And yet, when these buildings were built in the past, they weren't all the same. They did have that variation, and I hope that this one has a little variation from the others, and I think that's a good sign, in fact. So I think that what you're doing is very wealthy. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Yeah, I'd like to also say that I support the councillor's amended motion. I think that what is at stake here is that we have the standards and guidelines for historic places in Canada that apply here. We have the Centertown Heritage Conservation District, and we have guidelines that go with that. We've had a dialogue between the developer and his architectural team and planner with city staff. They went to the Urban Design Review Panel, which provides their comments to the heritage staff here, because this is in the Heritage District, and we've got the heritage staff comments on it. I think that in reading the suggested conditions and the observations of how the building fits and yet doesn't fit with the Heritage Conservation District guidelines leads us to really ask, how much is a building designed by a committee or by various consultants or staff, and how much is designed by the architect. And I think that since the 6-story building and its overall massing appear to conform, and that there seems to be unanimous agreement about that, the discussion about the details, whether it should be more severe or more exuberant, I think that in this case the architect appears to want to put some energy into the buildings, and it is a 6-story building on a corner, and therefore it is going to be a landmark. I think that we should allow the architect the liberty to have an expression for this site, for better or worse. I think that since we're not talking about lowering it to 3 stories, in which case it would be a background building or continue the street facade, we're dealing with a 6-story building, and my view is that we should trust the training of the architect and have it a consistent statement. In this case, it's using historicist details, but there's nothing evil about that. There's nothing illegal about that. And it made an effort to use high-quality materials like stone and metal and brick of interior brick size, so that I support the councillor's motion in order to give this building a chance to be a landmark building on that corner, and I think that it will contribute to the Heritage District. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Podolsky. I'd like to check with our legal colleagues if they've had a chance to do the quick work. Sorry to put you on the spot. A few more minutes?
Just 1 minute,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Okay. Mr. Moffat? Okay. Okay, well, I think what I'm hearing is general support for the idea. I think it should be said that there has been an expression or a realization that given that Bank Street is a traditional main street and the main point of interaction for a majority of the people walking along the street will be the retail spaces along the first floor, I do hear an interest in ensuring that the entrances do reflect the pattern in spirit that we see on a traditional main street. So my view is I don't want to complicate the proposed motion by speaking specifically about that point, but since the proponent's architect is still here, I would hope that that they would take into account the conversation here and realize that a preoccupation of the committee this morning, even though we're prepared, it sounds like, to approve the application without the document 7 conditions, that we would hope that the proponent would enter into discussions with staff in good faith in terms of assuring that traditional Main Street pattern that we want to see on that portion of the block is respected and maintained. So that's my view on the matter as we await the final motion. And I'm also happy to approve as read out if it's easier than oh. Okay, we've got it. So here we go. I'll read it out. Whereas report number ACS 2014, et cetera, recommends approval of the application with conditions as detailed in document 7 of the report. And whereas further submissions have been made in respect of the application, now therefore be it resolved that document 7, condition B, paragraph 2 be amended by deleting the phrase are to be addressed and replacing it with the phrase are to be considered, and that recommendation 3 be amended to read delegated authority for minor design changes in consideration with those, I think we need elements outlined in document 7 to the general manager, planning and growth management department. So that is the motion before us, put forward by Councillor McKenney. Carried? Okay, thank you very much. And apologies to the public for the technical delays. We're going to move on then to our last substantive item on the agenda. So we have before us an application to approve the construction of a new structure at 7 Clarence Street. This is a file that previous members of the committee would know well. I'm going to ask staff if there is an intention to make a presentation on this item. I think so. No?
Mr. Chair, I was not asked to give a formal presentation, but I did bring some photos of the proposed new and drawings of the proposed new building at 7 Clarence, but I don't have a full-fledged presentation. So I'll give you, with your indulgence, Mr. Chair, a mini presentation. What do I?
Okay. Well, for just for the purposes of background, I think as members are aware, 7 Clarence Street is located in the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District. This is an application from the National Capital Commission, which, as I said, was before the committee during 2014. This is a revised proposal. I think we have. No, we have no registered speakers, so I'll open it up to, oh, yes, we do, sorry. We'll ask our registered speaker, which is Christopher Zawinski, who is from the NCC, I believe, and David Scarlett. Are you both here? Okay, would you like to come forward and address the committee?
Actually, we were just available for questioning.
Okay. So I guess the question for our members is, are there any questions or comments on this application, either of staff or if you'd like the proponent, since the proponent is here, they are available for questions as well. So first, any questions to staff on this application? Councillor Wilkinson?
Well, I was just looking at, there's a lot of blank walls on this building. I just was wondering, is that expected in this area? There's a lot of, when you go in down there of the market area, there's lots of windows and things like this, and maybe it's just the way these designs are put in our report, because they're drawings, not...
Councillor, I'll just explain. This is glass, as is this.
Okay.
And there were concerns with the previous drawings that were in front of committee last year that there was too much glass and not enough wall. So part of the response on the part of the applicant was to reduce the amount of glass and increase the stone. So this is now stone, and then around the side, the window wraps around, but this had been glass before, now this is stone. So that was to reflect, and this is stone here, that was to reflect the concerns of the community, and came out during the discussions that the NCC had with members of the community. They had 4 meetings, and this was the kind of ratio of glass to stone that was deemed to be appropriate. So it's hard to show in a black and white picture. Actually, you can see here, this is etched glass, and this is stone. So it is a contemporary intervention in the Heritage Conservation District with a mix of glass and stone that reflects the community's concerns with the previous design.
And the idea of putting a contemporary building, the market is extremely varied in its architecture, I know, but...
I'm sorry, Councillor, I can't hear very well.
Using a very modern building in that area with the stone buildings and things around it, was this an idea just to try to break that lines and things, or was there any rationale for it?
Yes, that within the guidelines for the Byward Market Heritage Conservation District, there is, again, there's a prescription that buildings be of their own time. They do not have to have reflect the historical character of the neighborhood, and then there's certain things that we look for and that are in the design guidelines, which is a distinction between the first floor and the floors above, a rhythm that matches the street. So this secondary cornice is similar to the one on the adjacent building. So yeah, but there is no prescription against a clearly contemporary expression.
It does make it interesting, actually, having the variety.
Well, I would, yes.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't on the committee last year, so I didn't get all the other stuff. But.
Mr. Chair, I would just like to say that I would be very happy to move the staff report as is, and with a few comments. There are some really interesting lessons learned for the heritage policies of the city and the capital by this case study. I think that it is worth remembering that the building that was in this place before 7 Clarence was an integral part of the Heritage Conservation District, and it had to be demolished, on the advice of the NCC's engineering consultants because the stone walls were failing. And I think that this was regrettable, and I think that one of the lessons learned here is that if any owner, in this case the NCC, having owned the building and being stewards of this property and the properties on Sussex for the last 50 years, if they allowed this building to deteriorate. This really is a case of demolition by neglect, and it's regrettable now, and I think the lessons learned here, certainly by the NCC, is that they have to be better stewards of their portfolio of heritage buildings so that this does not happen again. The second lesson learned here is that the preliminary design that they submitted, last year has gone through a series of iterations with the benefit of consultation with the public, and the NCC is to be congratulated for making a real effort to consult with the community and to consult with the various stakeholders that have been involved, and they certainly have listened. They have appointed an architect, Anthony Leaning, that's here, that through this process has really been able to create an outstanding piece of contemporary architecture that really does fit in the Heritage District. I think one of the things that was not really mentioned in either the Cultural Heritage Impact Statement addendum or the report is that the height of the building was reduced from what it had before, so that the views of the mansard roofs of the adjacent building on the corner of Clarence and Reed are now visible from Clarence Street. And this is a great move, and it showed that the architect and the NCC were listening, that they understood the components of the recognized building on the corner, and that the use of stone and glass in the proportions that they have, I think, helps create a signature building out of a building that was a background building before. And bearing in mind what we just heard in the last file, there's nothing wrong with signature buildings in the city. We need more of them. And in this case, it demonstrates that you can have a building of extremely high quality in Heritage Conservation District. It just takes some work to get there, and I think the NCC and the architects in this case have put in that level of effort, and they have achieved something that is quite memorable. In one of the comments from the Lower Town Community Association, or one of the Lower Town community members, I can't remember, they call this a box, but a well-mannered box. And the building that was there before was a box. And I think that the epithet of well-mannered really is appropriate to this. The final point that I would make is that the NCC has expressed under its new regime the desire to be exemplary and a leader in heritage conservation, and by having consulted the community, they have demonstrated this. The committee previously had asked that they get comments from the Federal Heritage Building Review Office on this proposal. I've read the report. The report says that the NCC made an effort to contact FIBRO and ask them to review it. FIBRO said, well, it's not in our jurisdiction because the building itself is not recognized. Quite frankly, I don't think that's good enough for an institution that wants to be exemplary. The NCC has made suggestions to other institutions to voluntarily go to FIBRO on buildings that were not designated, and I think that there should be the consistent principle of following your own advice. But having said all that, I think that the Byward Market Heritage District will be blessed by this intervention, and I look forward to it being constructed as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other comments, then we can turn to the motion, which is that we recommend that Planning Committee recommend that Council approve the construction of the new structure at 7 Clarence according to plans by CSV Architects received as part of the application on February 3rd, delegate authority for minor design changes to the General Manager, Planning and Growth Management, and issue the heritage permit with a 2-year expiration date from the date of issuance. Carried? Carried. Great. Thank you very much. So that concludes the discussion of the substantive items on our agenda. Do dealing with the remaining issues on our agenda. Any notices of motion? No. Any inquiries? No. Other business? The only thing that I would say under other business is it is my intention to bring forward the results of our facilitated session at our next meeting on April 9th. So I hope to have for you then my sense to try and capture the discussion we had and some ideas on possible next steps. So I just wanted to mention that. Move to adjourn. Carried? Okay, adjourn. Thank you very much to the members of the public for joining us.